In this new episode of the Masters of Beautiful Achievements, what can we learn from the Masters on how to apply natural science, systems thinking, and personal leadership to realize these beautiful achievements? My name is Alexander Prinsen, and it is an honor you are listening to this episode. A small gratitude for those who are able to support the podcast through monthly or one-time donations. The links to contribute can be found in the description below. And now it's time to enjoy the conversation with today's Masters. So, what is so interesting about sustainability?
Well,
You don't like the word at all.
no. The word sustainability is you can compare that to the word CEO. Um, Everybody wants to be a CEO, even if it's a one-man band. Somebody calls himself or herself the CEO of the company, and there is only one employee, and uh, and so it is yeah, inflation of
Mhm.
title, and sustainability is also inflated. Has two inflated aspects. One, the first aspect is that most people don't have a clue what it's all about. So they only take a small piece of it, namely climate and the warming of the planet. So they think that that is sustainability. So that is the first mistake. And the second mistake is that it is used so often that in a negative way, that it doesn't inspire anybody.
Mhm.
And as an example, you cannot fly, you cannot eat
Yeah.
meat, you you cannot drive a an old timer because there is diesel in it, and so there are all the. It seems that all the fun things in life are now being questioned, and let me add a third thing, and that is that most people in business, when they talk about sustainability, they talk about the cost side of sustainability and not about the income side. And I always like to talk about the income side, the profit side of sustainability. And that's when you get the attention of companies, not when you talk about the cost side. And they hand it over to the CFO or to the legal people and handle the cost and try to make them as small as possible. So those are three things, not two, but three elements that make sustainability as a word kind of useless.
So as you can already hear that I'm talking to a serial entrepreneur who has done a lot with a lot of different businesses, and recently, I think the last 2 decades, 3 decades, moved into sustainability. And for him, sustainability, as he mentioned already, is something that will generate much more profit than you would ever imagine. And that it's something that he's experiencing, but also I am experiencing in business. People tend to find that a little bit strange, as sustainability is defined as cost. Today's conversation with Lane, we're going to show that the profit side is actually more fun, more interesting, more engaging, and even will challenge your curiosity towards towards very interesting innovations. So, Lane, I really gonna enjoy today's conversation. Just to kick off, you already mentioned three things, which were all three very interesting. But let's dive into I think, the entrepreneur part, because making a difference requires a very different mindset. You have to stand out. You have to be the change. And why is that we see that much more in real leaders who tend to be more entrepreneurial than those who are in management positions?
Yeah, well, that is a very interesting question. That is also the cause of a lot of irritation with people because apparently people would like to be an entrepreneur. So people see that as a great title. I am an
And what is the appeal then they have being a because it's
sexiness, wealth. People sometimes associate being an entrepreneur with being rich, being in charge, being the owner, and
Mhm.
has a lot of aspects that are appealing to an entrepreneur. So sometimes you see people who call themselves a serial entrepreneur who have never created a company, who have never ran a company, because an entrepreneur, in my definition, is a person who creates a company out of nothing, but not a one-man band. You know, a company, in my perception, is people, clients, preferably profit, because otherwise you go bankrupt, and in the end, so that is a company, and it's a lot of risk because things can go wrong, and you can lose a lot of money, you can lose your home. An entrepreneur is there are less entrepreneurs than we would like to think
Mhm.
that there are, because that people call themselves. When you go to LinkedIn, you see tons of serial entrepreneurs, and if you look in detail, they think they have been entrepreneurial, but that also is a little bit vague because
Mhm.
uh, and then you have managers, as you mentioned, people who run companies, who are employed by a company. A friend of mine once started a company in Russia, and he went to Russia with a suitcase, started out of nothing, rented a space, a home or a room, and started a company. Then later on, he hired in the Netherlands a great office manager. And that office manager became the second in command, the COO, eventually when the company grew. But that office manager called himself an entrepreneur. Well, he was an employee,
Mhm.
and all the entrepreneurial risk lied with that first person, and it's so underestimated, who came there, had nothing, didn't have a room or a space or a name or nothing legal, nothing was there, and to create something that does not exist out of nothing, and then build it all up, and then start to hire people and have customer, that is entrepreneurial, and that does not mean that managerial is not important. So what you see in most multinationals or public companies is people who have been selected, who have been found by headhunters, and who have been hired, um, and who run those companies. Those people are great managers, and they are hired guns, and as you would call them, and they come, they get a salary, bonus, shares, whatever. Not the entrepreneur.
They
They
don't
are
take the risk. Yeah.
they did not take that initial risk. If I run a company like Shell and I do a very poor job and I'm fired by Shell, I get a golden handshake because Shell has tons of money to do that, and they want to get rid of me if they want to fire me. So this, in my opinion, is riskless. Of course, there are many risks, but in the eye of the entrepreneur, it is riskless. I sometimes wish I would have had such a job that paid me a salary, and I stay there and I do my best, because those people work hard, they do their best, and they are talented. So I'm not saying anything about, because I gave a speech once to a group of about 50 to 100 managers of public companies in the south of France, and I made the mistake there to say, well, all of you are managers and not entrepreneurs. So let me, and then I started my speech, and that created a lot of fuss. The people were insulted because I called them managers and not entrepreneurs. They thought yeah, that it wasn't, that I meant a negative thing with that, but I didn't, because I think that super managers who run companies, who run public companies, who run multinationals, are highly talented people, highly valuable, and also scarce to find, and that is, but they are not the entrepreneur. Mr. Phillips, who started Philips centuries ago with selling the first light bulbs, that was an entrepreneur. But the person who runs Philips now is a manager, and probably a super manager, and that is but different. and the
Uh,
risk definition is also different.
and why is that so important related to sustainability or even the systemic change we need when we view the degradation of our environment? Human health is degrading. We get a lot of pollution in our bodies nowadays. What is then needed for us as society, and this for this type of people? Do we need to create new companies? Do we need to create a different mindset within these companies? Where will the change happen?
Well, the change happens where the change always happens. And the change always happens with the what we call the change makers.
Mm-hmm.
The change makers are the entrepreneurs. And it's not me. I didn't invent that theory. It has been there's so much research that has been done into that topic that um, the bigger multinationals uh, like change, but they like to talk about it, but they don't like to change. And so it's very difficult for people who have a different, I would say, risk perception
Mm-hmm.
uh, when you run a large company. And so there have not been many companies, larger companies or public companies, that have totally shifted their whole product offering because of the market conditions. And that is, there was always an entrepreneurial leader who did that. And take Apple, for example. They were in computers. And my children even now say, "Oh, does Apple also sell computers?" They thought that was a phone company. And that is, so what you see is that uh, the change that we need in the world, the different products, the different companies are driven by smaller entrepreneurial entities, companies, startups, if you wish, and that is and then taken over or
Mm-hmm.
acquired, or that technology is taken over by the bigger companies, and that is a pattern that is not new. That's a pattern that is not typical for sustainability, but it's a pattern that is typical for innovation, I would say.
Yes. Yeah.
Sustainability has a lot to do with innovation. And that is, how do you innovate your products? How are you able to produce, for example, cutlery in an airplane, not from plastic, but from a product that is like plastic, but 100% biodegradable. How do you do that? Well, first of all, you think, oh, now I have to get rid of the plastic supplier, and I was just ready to make that plastic recyclable plastic, but now I have to get rid of the plastic as as a whole. So how do I do that in another chain? So people don't like that, and it is a disruption that managers of big companies don't want to handle, don't want to take the risk. And that's what I said,
Mm-hmm.
risk perception. While an entrepreneur sees something as an opportunity for new business, for a whole new company, I think managers can see that as a risk. And Paul Polman, who was the CEO of Unilever, once said, "The world needs more courageous leaders." That is a famous statement that he once made years
Mm-hmm.
ago. And I've thought about that a lot. First of all, I agree completely. But secondly, I thought, well, why now would Paul Polman say that? And I think he made that statement because it's of the world that he is in. Paul Polman studied economy, I think, in Rotterdam or wherever, or no, I think he studied even philosophy or religion, but something he studied. Then he went to a company, so he has been a superb leader, manager of companies. So he has never been entrepreneurial. So I would say dare to say that the courageousness of entrepreneurs is degrees higher than the average courageousness of a manager of a company.
Could I
And
add on? Could I
that is
add something on that, Lane? Because then it reminds of me Ray Anderson, as a business leader from. He's passed away, but he was the founder and CEO of Interface. No, he wasn't even the founder of Interface. He took it over. I don't know where, but he
No,
was
he
great.
was a founder. He took the technology over.
Yeah,
It was his company.
and he's one of the few who actually decided I'm gonna transition away from the original business model, and I'm gonna challenge everybody to do it differently. I mean, that is an analogy with what you're explaining about the type of person we need. And I don't know. I don't. I mean, I can assume there are many of those in the world, but it's very hard to transition away from your core business into something new because that is disruptive to your current business model. And
No,
it,
it
it
is. It is. I think it is hard. It's not hard for an entrepreneur because an entrepreneur sees an opportunity and he becomes enthusiastic.
okay,
So I, I was honored. I was honored by to be asked by Ray Anderson to be the first person to deliver the Ray Anderson speeches. So
wow,
I did the first Ray Anderson speech for him. So I met him, and I and he told me the story how it had happened. So it was his company. Let's say they had a couple of 100 million of revenue. They took a technology from a Dutch company to make tappet floor tiles.
tiles, yeah,
Instead of a roll of carpet, so he had carpet tiles, which was easier to handle and also to renew when it was dirty. So he said he was at a certain point in time he had to prepare a presentation that he had to give to clients, and it had something to do with sustainability, but he didn't know what that was. So he went to the library and he borrowed a book. And he told me even the title, but I
it's the
forgot
book
the
for
title
Paul
now.
Hawken.
Yeah, Paul Hawken. Yeah, and that is that book. And and while he was reading the book, he said when he was halfway in the book, he he thought, I am a criminal because everything that is wrong, I'm doing. And that is,
Mm-hmm.
I have my employees standing in dust, and and they inhale toxic gases, and so everything that I'm doing is wrong. So I have to change that, or I don't change that. So he said, at that moment, I felt that I was at a critical point in my life when I was halfway down the book, because he said, I know now what I'm doing, and now I can go on and make a lot of money with it, or I can say I'm going to change it. And that is, and then he said he thought about his grandchildren. He said, so when later on, when I'm old, and my grandchildren said, so, and granddad, what did you do when you realized that? And then he said, so the next day, he informed his employees, and that is courageous leadership. That's what Paul Polman would call courageous leadership. I would call that normal entrepreneurship, because he saw an opportunity of business. He didn't see something that would make him bankrupt, because then he would probably have thought a little bit different or more creative. But he saw
Yeah.
an opportunity and he grew his company tremendously. It's now the biggest, I think, in the world in carpet tiles. And that is so he made his and he changed everything: his factories, the materials, the recyclability, and he gained a lot of traction and a lot of money. So he made a lot of money with it, and that is and he is a courageous leader, and that is an and maybe somebody else would have said, well, you know, the company is going well. Why would I make a change? It's a risk, and but it was his company. So I was just recently asked the question, what is the difference then? And I would say the intrinsic driven.
Mm-hmm.
He was intrinsically driven to make his business successful. He and the people who are intrinsically driven, passionately, are the entrepreneurs. They have an idea, they have a vision, and most business leaders, managers, are hired. So they are given a vision. It's not their vision. They might like it and they might support it and they might be very successful with it, but it's not their vision. It was a
No.
vision of somebody else.
They are
And so
hired, and
they
they are hired to do that vision. So
they are hired to do that, and so it is logical, I would say, that the people who are not intrinsically driven are less passionate about what they do.
But are you also doing the assumption that these passionate people most of the time run family-owned businesses? And it's there that you find the innovation, and it's there where you find the ethics and just common sense?
Well, now use the name family-owned businesses. Uh, of course, when a person, um, I use the name Philips, when he started his company in the last maybe 2 centuries ago, he it was named Philips after his name. So it was in the beginning a family owned business, but now it is maybe the family owns some shares, but like in Heineken, uh, it is not ran by the family. Maybe there's in the supervisory board of Heineken, uh, but they're also second generation or third generation. So I'm not always so entrepreneurial as the
Mhm.
starter of the company. So I would say that uh, most of the time, family-owned businesses are pretty entrepreneurial, but not always. You know, they are the Auping family owns a big stake. I don't know how big the stake is in the Auping company, and a family is pretty sustainable in their value set, their ethics, and but they and that's why Alping is a B Corp, for example, and doing what they are doing. Circular mattresses is what they have a patent on. So, but it's not always the case. You know, it's not a guarantee that when a company is family owned that it is entrepreneurial.
What is then, because what you did, I have two thoughts in my mind. One of them is I understand what you're saying about entrepreneurs. Most there are entrepreneurs who start a company and put the company into the market and decide that it's time to pull out. I'm going to sell my company and then use the money to start a new company. And then you tend to become a serial entrepreneur. And because those two types you then have is to distinguish one and the other. What I found in family-owned businesses where the family still runs the business, let's emphasize that in this case, there you see that they value the money they invest. I mean, every euro or dollar needs to have a good investment, and if they find a revenue stream which is profitable, they will dive into it and generate that. Whereas if you look at the multinationals, uh, most of the time a waste stream is a waste stream. We sell the waste stream to a waste disposal company, and that's it. We're done with that. And what you see nowadays with family-owned businesses, they actually review all the outputs and see where they can create more cash flows. And if that means they have to set up a new corporate entity to valorize that waste stream, they will do that. So the question, and then it means that they are just as such more entrepreneurial because they see constantly business opportunities where there actually would have been costs. So they um and so that's one thing that I that comes to mind when I hear you, Lane, talking about entrepreneurship and the drive to valorize and see for new opportunities. Um, if you look more from a systemic point of view, um, because the change has to come from change makers, and there's a lot of stuff happening globally. Recently, recently, at least here in the Netherlands, PFAS is a very recurring topic, and they discovered also that PFAS is in our toilet paper and in our writing paper, and basically PFAS is everywhere. What does this mean for those who are running a business and for those who see opportunities? Because that is becoming a global threat that PFAS is getting into our bodies and all. Basically, what Rihanna's and came to conclude the way I'm running my business for all employees is not very healthy. I need to do something about that. So, are we entering an era of consciousness of, or are most leaders still ignoring? Yeah, ignoring the biggest issues we have today.
Um, it's a big question. Um, so I have to be careful that I don't give a big
No,
answer
no,
to
just
that.
break it,
That will take
break it,
hours and
break
hours.
it down.
Um, but it is. It has a little bit to do, Alexander, with what I just earlier mentioned about courageous
Hmm.
leader. And just this morning, I had a long conversation with two corporate lawyers, legal people, and talking about the law and what the law allows and what the law
Hmm.
does not allow, how intelligent lawyers can find legal loopholes and be very proud of that. So I'm so proud that I don't have to pay my taxes. I have the money, but I rather keep it myself than that I give some money to the common good, because it's that is how I see taxes, and
Hmm.
that is and we had that discussion, and it is for most lawyers. They, to be very honest, and I took it from their statements. They were lawyers, business lawyers. Most lawyers stick to the law. And when the law does not hinder them not pay taxes,
Hmm.
they don't pay taxes. And they don't hardly ever, most lawyers, not all, think about the ethical values
Hmm.
of a company and about the question, why is my company here? And recent studies have been done to investigate how much of the success of a company has to do with the leader or the founder of the company.
Hmm.
It's an interesting study because take, for example, Jeff Bezos of Amazon. Jeff Bezos, I think, personally would think, well, I created this company and I'm a hero and I own 250 billion or whatever dollars and they're all mine because it is my thing. Well, he is, according to that study, I think it was done by Harvard, completely wrong. If there would not have been an internet, there would not have been Amazon. How much money did Amazon invest in the internet? Zero. It was paid out of public money. Uh, if there would not be roads, he could sell stuff, but it could not be delivered. How much money did Amazon over the past centuries, I'm talking about, spent on road development, infrastructure development, internet development, schooling where his people went to, hospitals where they go into taken care of. So at a maximum, a founder of a company that thrives on society, because every company thrives on society, because that's where in the end the clients are, is 20%. And so that means that 80% is thank you very much, society, for making it possible for my company to be here at all. So, and that goes in the direction of another person that is called Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia. If you on the one hand to take Jeff Bezos and on the other side to take Yvon Chouinard, they are
Hmm.
complete opposite persons. It's a very humble man who has given away billions, his company that had a value of billion, Patagonia, to nature. Jeff Bezos maybe also gives something away, but he is very careful that he keeps billions for himself because he necessarily needs that, and that is for something that I have no clue, and that
Hmm.
is so. I am uh, the ethical aspect, and that should be in a person, in you, in me, what is right and what is wrong is, I would say, I used to be I used to think that that was almost the same for every person in the world. I'm now thinking a little bit differently because I see so many examples of people who don't seem to care or give a shit about what happens in the rest of the world as long as they are wealthy, that I think, well, what has are we losing moral um, our
Compass.
moral anchors?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we are, and I'm not the only one who thinks that. I think we are. The things that we used to find normal are no longer normal, and we accept things that presidents who have been convicted criminals who can lie all over the place, not only in the US but all over the world. We seem to be accepting that. We seem to be accepting situations in war zones that in the past we thought were criminal. But so there is something there is something wrong, I think, with the development of our normal of our norms and ethical values in the world.
And is that because uh, let's say keep it on companies. That companies are more I have the Dutch word, so I need to translate it into English. Are more focused on generating the maximum profit they can as long as they can, or uh, is it because there are so many hired people, but just see how long the ride lasts, and then we'll take our loss and move on.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it could be both even, but uh, when ethics or moral behavior starts to shift, um, it can go quickly because
Mm-hmm.
people see examples, they see accepted behaviors, so they think, "So why can I not do it?" It's the it's the same, for example, in the Netherlands, we have a company called Tata Steel. They make steel. They are the biggest, number 1 polluter in the country, Tata Steel, in the Netherlands. And that is, so what people sometimes say, "Well, if we stop that in the Netherlands, we lose our steel production, and the dirty business will go on somewhere else." Well, that in itself is such a stupid, it's probably true, but that doesn't mean that you should stop or not stop, I mean. So if somebody is breaking into a house and steals money or watches or whatever, it doesn't mean that I can say, well, he is doing it. Well, I might as well do it as well. And that is it's the same thing as if I drive an electric car. Well, it doesn't mean so much because all the other people here are driving diesel cars. So it is, um, it's you. You make a decision. It's Tata Steel. It's the leader of Tata Steel. He makes the decision. And if we decide as a country that we don't want that, we should not say, well, then the steel industry goes somewhere else and the dirty, well, let it go somewhere else because we set an example. And if we don't set the example and then we lose, probably it has been calculated that losing Tata Steel would save the country a lot of money if you look at it from a macroeconomic scale, not for
Yeah.
the company maybe, and people would lose their jobs. They will have other jobs for them, and even if we pay them until their pension age, then still the country would gain from that, and that is so. Yeah, I I'm trying to think the the bigness of your question if I'm touching
No,
the.
but it's. I think the example of if the example is very exemplary, and I mean, I have a child of 4.5 years old, and setting an example is. I mean, the reason I'm giving this example because I see corporates behave like children. When you put the boundary and when you're very consistent in where the boundary is, their natural reaction is say no, 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 and see if they can push the boundary a little bit further. And I see the exact behavior with big companies.
Yeah,
When
and
you
then, for example, you mentioned PFAS, PFAS. And the company that is doing that, or there are several companies doing that, but the company Chemours, and there's also 3M in Belgium that are spilling PFAS still. They now think, oh, you know what? The laws are so strict in the Netherlands. Let's put that whole PFAS production in the US. I say, well, goodbye. Let it go. It's not bad. It's great. It's good that it goes to the US. Then you kill people in the US instead of kill people here. And that is
and pollute the whole ecosystem and with the
but
mussels, and we
yeah,
have
but
all the
exactly. But
shellfish.
but the fact that people think like that is almost stupidity. It is complete stupidity. It's criminal behavior. So somebody says, we are now killing people in the Netherlands. Let's stop that because apparently people don't like that very much that we kill them. So let's now start killing people in the US. That's what
I
they say.
I had a very interesting conversation with my Dutch podcast, which is about the agricultural transition new four. And one of my speakers mentioned he was an entrepreneur, a food distributor. He said, "Our mission is to be chosen by the consumer, because once the consumer chooses for us, they made a choice, and we are not opposing us on them." And it's the same way. I'm contemplating on that based on what you just mentioned, Lane. Is that, for instance, with this industry, we choose not to have them because we value the well-being of the country and the lower cost for environmental cleanup, and that will bring much more towards the country from other entrepreneurial opportunities, which will come out of there as a result. And maybe and that's the philosophical question I then have, is maybe it's really interesting for countries to reflect and say, d- for what do we want to be chosen for by the industry? Because for the right to pollute, or for the right to contribute. And that's one thing, and that's that's resonating now with me, Elaine, from that point of view. It says what, yeah, and if you pollute, you're not contributing. So what is your license to operate?
Well, you contribute something negative. So you contribute something, and that is if you pollute. And the saying goes that a country gets the leadership that it deserves. I just had a discussion
Mm,
today with somebody from Texas, and we were talking about the leadership in the US. And that is, but you can also say a company gets the leadership that it deserves. But you can also say a country gets the companies that it
that it
deserves.
deserves, yeah.
So if I would say, well, I am taking old ships apart. That is dirty oil tankers and
In
stuff.
India, yeah.
Yeah. So why does that not happen on the beaches of the Netherlands? Well, it doesn't happen on the beach of the Netherlands because it's poisonous. It is absolutely destroying nature. It is actually not workable for people who nobody in the Netherlands would want to do that work. And it's rust, it is dust, it is toxic. And
Everything you
so
don't want.
everything that is bad, it is. So where do those ships go? Well, they go to African countries and they just pull up on the beach, and that is the last thing they've done. And then they're being taken apart by people who can make a very small amount of money with that and have no choice to do that because there is no other work. And so apparently those countries allow that. And sometimes those countries are richer. They could be richer than they actually are because they have all kinds of products like copper, like
Mhm.
scars, metals, diamonds, gold, whatever that is only sticking with a very small group of people and the profit. So, um, but in the Netherlands, we have a government that says we don't allow that. We have legislation, no ships on the beach. So, but other countries, they get that. So that means that if Tata Steel, with their poisonous business, or the PFAS production, like Chemours, would move out of the Netherlands and go to another country, that other country is is yeah, is worse off. They get a present that is not good for them. They get poison gases. They get, so it is good luck
From
to those countries, I would say.
well,
Eventually,
or the other hand, if you close your old factory and you start a new one, it gives them a clean sheet to implement some clean technology. So in a way, that could also be a good thing.
yeah.
Uh,
But why does then in the Netherlands there's discussion that then the government has to pay for that? Why? Uh,
that's easy money for a company.
Yeah, because an entrepreneur who says, "Well, if I close my shop," and like for example, we were talking about Ray Anderson, the company of Ray Anderson over the past 30 years, because I think it's more than 30 years ago that he read that book, and that he decided to change the company the next day, the next morning. So no planning, no budgeting. And that is also entrepreneurial. It is immediate.
Yeah,
So you see it and you change. You're not going to say, let's make a budget. So when I ran companies in the past where we wanted to be sustainable, people said, so shall we make a plan and a budget? I said, no, before we do all that, just start. And they said, with what? I said, well, whatever you like. So make it up yourself, do what you want. And that
yeah.
is, but after a year, I'm going to ask all of you, and we in that company we had 1,500 people working. I'm going to ask all of you, what did you do in the past year on the area of sustainability? You're all going to tell me, and then we have experiences, and then we're going to make a plan. But first, we do. So I am a firm believer that an entrepreneur acts first and thinks later. It sounds a little bit ridiculous.
No,
Act
no, it's
first. And an entrepreneur of a manager plans, makes budgets, the risk of the
Lane, uh, to rephrase that, you mean act first is more from intuition, from a gut feeling, from I don't know, it feels good to go in that direction, and then we make it up all the way. If you use your head, you suppress everything that your feeling or your senses are telling you. Um,
yeah,
and and
that's it.
and and when something feels good, you know that the outcome will be good. Because and it's something I remember when we were preparing this conversation. You have to have fun in what you do, and if it feels good, it feels you get fun. You get you get energized. Your curiosity thrives. You want to figure it out. And if you don't have fun, you end up in a burnout,
Yeah, no,
or
that's
you
it.
or you have to sell your company because the spark has gone.
Yeah, I mean, the spark is on, you have to leave, and um, that is
And
what
it
I always tell my children. If you would be employed and you work for a company and you don't like it, go. There's plenty of places in the world where you or create your own company, and that is basically, I think, why I have created so many companies, because I have um, I'm not patient enough to wait for somebody else to do it. I'm not patient enough to believe that other people will figure it out eventually. And so, to go back to my first step in my career, because I think the more personal we make this, the more interesting it is to people. Why did I start my first company? Why? Well, there was only one reason, because I wanted to run a company. I wanted to run a company, and no company would let me run it because I was too
ah
young. And that was my ambition, to run a company. And that is, so I thought the only solution, if no company wants to hire me because I'm too young, I had a master's degree in business economics and accounting, so I thought that was it. And people, I worked for Philips, and Philips said, well, it take 10 to 15 years before you can run a part of our company. Maybe a factory somewhere in the world, but not the whole company. So I said, well, if it takes that long and it is that uncertain, there's only one solution, that I leave and start my own company, because then I'm in charge of it. And that was the beginning. Later on, I had different motives to start companies, but in the beginning, that was my motive. And I didn't care what that company would do as long as I could run it. And coincidentally, it became artificial intelligence, but it could have been anything.
And then, I mean, I remember also you had an example of somebody who was moving up in the ranks and losing your authenticity while moving up in the business politics. And that is something you see, especially within bigger companies. On the other hand, you mention courageous, authenticity, your own passion, drive, and if the energy is not there, leave. But it also requires you to, as a person, to trust yourself that okay, this is not it. They hire me to do something which doesn't feel good. I'm looking for somebody else who wants to hire me for something I actually enjoy doing. Um, but that also requires a certain courageousness that most companies will not allow. They just, okay, if you have a different opinion, move.
Yeah, yeah, and then move. And that is, so I was surprised by the question or by the remark, and you are referring to that now, Alexander, of a person who was the CEO of a big public company here in the country, in the Netherlands. And she made a statement to me that was very surprising, and that I didn't understand, and maybe even didn't understand until now. And I'm now beginning to, because in the light of this discussion, she said, the higher I went in the ranks of this company. Now she was CEO. The higher I went, the more I lost my authenticity. So, and I was so surprised by that I didn't know a response. So I thought, well, because I thought that to me that is so strange,
Mm-hmm.
because I am what you see is what you get. I say what I think. I try to say that sometimes in a polite way when it's not nice what I'm going to say, but I try to be as honest as possible. To me, it would be, the higher I go up in the ranks, the more authenticity I will show, because that is what the people need. You cannot be a leader of a company just telling a story that people think, well, that is just a joke, or he or she is making it up, and it's the story of the shareholders, but not the story of the person. And
Mm-hmm.
then so the authenticity is becoming bigger. The when you move up. So that is why I didn't understand it. But I think it has to do, in the light of this discussion, also with entrepreneurial uh, mentality and managerial. She was a super manager, so very good manager, but a manager. And so it was her ambition to move up in the ranks. So, but why? Because then she had more power, she had more influence. I don't know what, but there is always a reason, and but not the intrinsic drivenness of a founder of a company who says, "Well, my passion is this." And that is when I stand in front of a group of people and I speak to them, if that's my employees or my clients, it is the passion that strikes them. It's the passion of my story, and why. And it's not that I'm standing here passionately. No, I'm standing here being authentic, telling what I feel, telling what I care about, telling why I have my business. And that is a story that sells. And that is, but not easy to fake. You know,
Mhm.
if you stand in front of a group of people and you have to tell the story, one of my board members in the biggest company that I ran was a company in 60 countries, and then the board, the supervisory board, decided to move into a different direction, and I did not agree with that. So, and then the chairman of the board said to me, "But Leen, you can tell that story to the people, can you? Because you're a great speaker. You can speak. You can tell that story." I said, "But yes, but I don't agree with the story." And he said, "But who cares? Nobody will know." I said, "Well, you're wrong. Everybody will know because people know me as an authentic person. So when I'm standing in front of them, I'm telling a story that I don't believe in. It is a second, and they sense it. And no, no, no." He said, "No, no, no, Leen, don't worry about that." So I left the company. I said, "Fuck you." And that is, if that's how you think about people, that I can just screw them and I can
Mhm.
tell a story that I don't believe in, that's not me. So you leave. And so, and that is logic to me. It's logical. And that is, but not, I think, to the hired guns. The hired guns run companies, not always, eh? They're also great people. But some hired guns, I think most of them, they run a company, the company has a story. It's also the companies that hire McKinsey to write their strategy. I think I never needed McKinsey to write strategy of my company. My companies have been also very big, but I have the strategy because that's why I created the company. I don't know McKinsey. McKinsey doesn't have a clue about what I want to do because normally I move into markets that do not exist, and it's, and that's the story of Steve Jobs and the iPhone. Steve Jobs, everybody in Apple was against the iPhone. People didn't see a market. There were many phones. There was Nokia, there was Samsung, there were all kinds of phones. Why was even Microsoft, I think, had a phone. So why would Apple create a phone? There was no market for it. There was market research done. There was no market. But what people forgot is that the market did not know that they
Mm.
needed something that did not exist yet. And that is super marketing. So if you have a sense, and that is super entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial thinking is that you think the market needs something, and if you want to test that, it's like with AI. In my first company, did you think there was demand for AI in 1985? There was no demand for AI. Nobody knew what it was. So people didn't know what it could do, what it could mean to them. They didn't know what it was. There was no market. So I went to my investors in the beginning. There was nobody interested to invest because they said, "Did you do market research?" I said, "Well, I don't bother because there is no market." And then I said, "Well, then there is no financing either." And that is and that is the stupidity sometimes of people who finance. They and that is why they make hits with Apple and other companies, because quite often those companies also, I think Amazon and other companies, they went for a market that did not exist, but the market did not even realize that they needed something because it didn't exist. And that is the let's say the vision that successful entrepreneurs often have.
But then you imply that these entrepreneurs are sort of systems thinker because they multiply. They say one plus one, then it becomes three. Because if we connect that technology to the next technology, then we have something that how do you call it? Combines certain technology, and then you have a tool or a product that that can do much more than the products on their own. But that also means that they have an understanding of sort of they can look into the future and see multiple technology emerge, let's say in 5, 10, 20 years, and then say if those time frames work out, then we need to move in this direction to harness the technology development that is coming. Because because what I see, if you look at scenarios and trends, those who actually understand what's happening in the different technologies and how they are emerging and what is needed for them to, I don't know, scale up, break, to emerge, then you can see what will happen in the future. And that can be on AI, it can be on hardware, but that can also be on material design.
Can be on anything, and that
Yeah,
is so.
but that is a trait that you don't see very often.
No, 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 and that is and always you see successful entrepreneurs, you see more successful entrepreneurs, you see super successful entrepreneurs, and every time you move up that ladder, there are less, there are fewer, and that is so the if there are when Google started, there were thousands of companies that started as search engines, not only Google. So why did Google become Google and so successful? Why did Facebook, which started as a simple, hilarious idea of a book with pictures of girls, and that is so students could find a date, and that is on one university. Why did that become so huge? And other date books or whatever did not make it. And I think it has to do with luck. It has to do with uh, yeah, coincidence of meeting the right investors, but also the intelligence of just making a simple killer app that that was so simple that other people didn't see it, overlooked it. So uh, Google was so simple that I think to most other companies that wanted to build a search engine, it was too simplistic. And definitely to me, because I was one of the few people invited to invest in their family and friend round when I was living in Silicon Valley. Well, uh, but I didn't do it. I was allowed to invest $50,000. We were living there. And I looked at it and I said to my wife, well, I don't think they will make it. There are so many search engines, and the simplicity of there was only a white page with a little thing, and that is so I don't think that that is going to be successful. So I did not invest 50,000. A friend of mine invested 50,000 and made 50 million. But if he would have stayed longer, he would have made 500 million, by the way. But he pulled back at a certain point and he said, well, this is now at the top of what they can be. And so that is the mistakes that you can make. And if you do not completely understand
Mhm.
what they are doing, the social, the companies like Facebook and others. I visited all those companies in Silicon Valley when I was living there, and sometimes I asked the question. There were 10 people in a room that was the whole company, and they were all nerds. And I said, "What is your business model?" And they looked at me like I was from outer space. What is your business model? He said, we don't have a business model, Lane. Come on. And that is, we'll figure it out later. And they were just hacking along. And that is, and they didn't have because they didn't know what they were going to do. They were doing something. They were building networks. They were building, and later on, their advertising and everything that made their business model, but not in the beginning. And that is so they had no clue. They were just having fun. And that is, the entrepreneurialism at the top. Now in Silicon Valley, if I go there, it's about making money. It's all about money. It's AI is all about money. It's all about language models and so. But let's well, that is a sidetrack. But uh, yeah, to answer your question.
There is something because if we were talking about these leaders and you mentioned old tech, um, do you also have examples which are very much tangible in the real world? For me, tech is still the I don't know, it's the internet world where we're not having normal honest conversations in the real world. We see each other and we actually exchange products. Do you have examples from material products that actually are having an impact way beyond what the founders originally thought of?
Well, I think that that happens. First of all, it happens a lot, huh? If you that brings me also to the question, Alexander, of when you start a company and you need money, you make a plan and you make a budget and you go to investors and you present that. And then you have very few entrepreneurial investors. You have many banking oriented, risk aversive investors. And that is uh, because an experienced investor in Silicon Valley once told me, Leen, do you know why we ask for business plans? And I said, well, tell me. He said, a plan is made so you can change it. And I didn't understand what he was talking about. He said, but that's all. For the rest, the plan is useless. And that is because a plan, because that things will always happen. It will always go different. He said, that's our
Mm-hmm.
experience. So you make a plan so you have something to change. And that is because if you don't have a plan, there's nothing to change. And that
I
is,
agree.
and that
Interesting.
was, and he was so experienced that I believed what he was saying, but I didn't understand what he was talking about. And he also said it's the same with the financials. That the people that we hire, the people, his analysts, he said, my analysts, we call them the spreadsheet cowboys, because you can make the numbers work. Always, you can make them work. Then you say you change a little bit, that okay, then we lower the prices, okay, and before you know it, the analysts and the entrepreneurs need investors. They're sitting there, uh, queuing and tuning those spreadsheets, so that in the end everybody is happy. They say, yeah, no, this is a fantastic spreadsheet. Let's do it. Let's invest. But it will never happen. He said it will never go as that. So I said, so what do you look for? He said, I look for people, for the team, and the people who are resilient. Because one thing we know for sure, it will always go different. What we don't know for sure is how the team
Will
responds to
respond.
that.
Yeah.
And that what will they do if we have invested money to open a chain of restaurants and boom, there's COVID. What will they do? Will they quit? Will they panic? Will they start a delivery practice so that they bring the food to all the homes? Or what will they do with my money as an investor? And that is so I have to look for that, and that is not in a spreadsheet, and that is not what analysts with a banking attitude that are working for my investment company have any clue about, because they've never ran a company, and so they think that the truth lies in the numbers, and that is and now I understand that, because I've seen it happen over and over. I've also been in frustrating meetings with so many with investors who now I don't even start with it. So if I would need money, then I I will judge the investor, not the other way around. There are so many investors that you can judge the investor, and you say, "Well, I'm sitting here talking to you." That an example of that, my son, one of my sons, has a company in Africa, and they make bamboo toilet paper, and they were talking to investors, and it was a very frustrating activity when they raised money. It's of course behind us now. They raised money, but and he said sometimes it took 6 months of meetings. And then after the 6 months of meetings, they said, you know what? We don't invest in you because you're in Africa. And then my son said, but 6 months ago we told you that we're in Africa. And then we started this whole, and now 6 months later, with all the work that we've done and all the time. But it is for those small startups, it is it's it costs them a lot of effort
Mm-hmm.
and time, and they're small. For investors, the analysts have nothing else to do. So they just ask questions, and they go into this and they go into that. They have no clue what the burden is that they put upon those entrepreneurs. And that is, so there is such a mismatch. And in the US, it is completely different. Completely different how that is being approached. I never forget that I wanted to raise money for a company in the year 2000, and we had no company. We had 8 people in a team, experienced, great people, and we had a PowerPoint presentation. So and we worked on that for a whole week with that team. And the second week, we visited 2 investors in, Sand Hill Road. Sand Hill Road is the place where people are in America, the investors. So we visited 9 o'clock. I did the presentation, the team was there, and after 45 minutes, the people looked at each other. With 3 partners, they looked at each other and they were smiling, so they were happy. This is story. I said, Leen, what a great story. When are you going to start? I said, well, as soon as we raise money, we're going to start the company. And they said, what is the valuation? Or how much do you need? I said, we need 10 million. And they said, okay, 10 million, good. And that is how much does it give us? I said, 10% of there was no company, mind you. And they said, okay, good, 10%, 10 million, good, okay, we do it. Stay in the building. We will sign this afternoon. Thursday, the Monday, the money was in the bank. That is still an attitude that is ongoing there. They liked the team. They saw that we didn't have a figures in the spreadsheets, whatever. We were going to build the fastest growing e-business company, which we did in the 2 years after that. Then we had this bubble, the dot-com bubble, as they called it. Company didn't go bankrupt, but it went down and then back up again. But it was a rough ride then. But in the beginning, we grew the company to 450 people in a year and a half in 10 countries. They invested 10 million. The investment company that we visited on Tuesday also visited. So we raised 20 million in 2 days. And at the end of the week, the 20 million was in the bank. Boom. And that is why, because we had a great team. They believed the team. They didn't care about the rest, and they invested. And why did they invest so quickly? Because they had 2 billion to invest in 2 years. So they had to get rid of the money. And that is so they just shot, the shotgun approach, as they call it. And they
Lane, to interrupt, because material innovation is much harder than internet innovation.
yes.
And
So
your
it's
son,
real and virtual.
yeah,
The real world and the virtual world that you're
and
talking about.
yeah, and the real world is much harder. You have to go from lab to pilot to bigger pilot, and then to your real factory. Um, if you have a certain technology, it depends on which directions you can go, and the valley of death is much deeper than, for instance, for tech. Um, if you would translate your experience to that, what would that how would that look like? Because I know friends of mine in the network of mine, to set up a new innovation, you need to show that it works, so that you can produce it. You can produce it for an acceptable cost, and you need to find the clients, and you need to scale up. You need a bigger factory. So the capex is much more intense, and doing it the right way is such a thin line. Some of them raise too much, they're too ambitious, and then it all crumbles down. Some of them raise too little and don't make it, and some of them who are just on the thin line go go through, and actually then the product comes on the market. Um, and that is for investors also a big risk, because yeah, you invest in the technology, but you have no idea whether they're gonna actually make it to the market, because it's so turbulent, and there's so many factors that you're dependent on which you cannot control. If you start a company and then suddenly you have a war in Ukraine, it's done. For what reason? So you have much
So
more
so so
locked in investment.
what is the exact question, Alexander?
So if you would translate that your experience which you had in, for instance, Silicon Valley, how would you translate that to capital intensive innovations and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, well, um, a a banker once told me recently that 70% of all the money available is being invested in the virtual world, virtual economy, he said. And 30% is invested in the real economy. and the real economy is stuff, is bridges, is products, as you mentioned, is materials, it's um, and I said, "Well, is why is that?" I asked him. "Is that because the return is higher?" He said, "No, the return is the same. So it's not because return." I said, "But why is it then?" He said, "It's easier. It's easier. People can sit behind their screens. So it's laziness." And that is, and he was an experienced international banker who was a big contributor to the movement in the banking world, global, which is called the um, the Alliance of Banking on Values. So he's, I think it was
Mhm.
Banking on Values, and that is, or the network of banking on values. Banks that have values that they invest in, and I uh, and if you look at that easiness, and you translate that to to stuff, to things, then it's interesting to see how, for example, AI is being treated in China and how it's being treated in the US. In the US, it's all about money.
Mhm.
In China, it's more about productivity and about things. So I just saw a speech made by the CEO of Ford Motor Company.
Mhm.
And CEO of Ford Motor Company said the biggest problem of the automobile industry in the US is that we have hardly any companies that use this new technology for the car industry. They're all wound up in language models like that.
Yeah.
That is it. And how can they value the companies? How can they make money quickly? And in China, he said, there is so much AI in hardcore stuff in the cars that the advantage that they have in the car industry over us is so tremendous that I wonder if we will ever be able to catch up. So if we are able to keep the automobile industry in the US alive. So that was a pretty serious statement from the CEO of Ford Motor Company, which is not a small company, and that is that has to do with the fact that um, uh, I think investors are also it's easier to understand the story and the spreadsheet cowboys, as I told you before,
Mhm.
than, for example, work with a company. I work with several companies now who have products and who I used to work for companies with products like solar systems, and now with a company that has 100% biodegradable uh, plastic. It's not plastic. It's because plastic is not degradable, and that is but 100% biodegradable. So not a small percentage of plastic in spoons in airplanes, but no plastic. So
They have a biodegradable polymer.
100% biodegradable, and that is and they produce that on a mass scale already. They have factories, and but still, it is difficult to explain that to people, and it takes a little bit longer. You need a little bit more of a vision. Things can go wrong, but things can go wrong with anything, you know. But I there is less money available for those kind of things that there is for the hype stories, and that is
Are you implying that if we take these 60%, we're moving to virtual world, if we take 30% out and move to 60% in the real world, then we can get rid of all the negative environmental issues we have, because then suddenly we have the right polymers, suddenly we have the right products, we have the right way of reusing the stuff.
yeah. I think Alexander, I would not go so far to say that technology can solve all the problems that we have in the world, but it can solve a lot, and uh, but there is always a counter pressure from existing industries. Um, because, for example, so much money has been invested in electrifying the world that that hinders water, hydro energy for how do you call that?
Well,
Well,
hydrogen.
yeah, hydrogen for cars, for example. That is that people say, yeah, that is great, that is the future, that is the future. But I always say, as an economist, first we have to write off everything that we have invested in electrifying. That will take 20 years, at least. So we will push back the rest because you cannot keep investing. There's not enough money to keep investing all the time in new stuff. And I've seen that with artificial intelligence. I see that with all technologies. If you have a 100% compostable plastic, it's not plastic, of course, but
Polymer. Just use the word polymer, and then it's much
yeah,
easier to
if you have
understand.
100% compostable polymer, it is a threat to the plastic industry. So they will do whatever they can to uh, to put that in a bad light, and believe me, they will. And they will succeed because they have a lot of money. So they will push it back, and that is it's the same with paper. One of my other children has a company in stone paper, and they make notebooks like I make my notes in. And it's made out of 80% stone, waste stone, powder, like flour, and uh, and 20% bioplastic. And the combination of that creates writable notebooks. They just sold 20,000 notebooks to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They sold, I think, 20,000 notebooks to this big band. What's the most famous band and the biggest band in the world? Coldplay. And so they, but they have almost physical uh, disruption by the paper industry. The paper industry, which is highly polluting water, they are cutting trees, and it's a devastating industry. But they do whatever they can to survive. It's a struggle for life for that industry. So if you build new industries on a big scale, as you say, to save the world, you kill other industries, and those industries don't want to be killed. So they fight. They fight back. It's like the oil industry knew 30 years ago. Everybody knows that 30, 40 years ago, they knew what was going on. But they just they bought reports, they bought professors, they did what they are fighting for life to keep the profits going. And that is so and that fight is it's not that when the world sees something, wow, that is a great technology. We have some now a plastic that is a polymer that is 100% biodegradable. We're going to do, and we're yay, we have found the solution. No, it's not like that. The negativism around that is the pushback from the status quo is phenomenal. And you also see that in the B Corp, if you talk about sustainability. When there was one B Corp or two B Corps or three or 10, then nobody was talking about it. And oh, that's a nice little community of companies. But now there's over 10,000 B Corps. There's Danone, there's big B Corps. Pushback. Now there's a legislation. No, no, can you call yourself a B Corp? Because it's threatening the status quo. And we have to understand that, and I see it because I am from the status quo. I am from that world. You see the pushback and the disregard and the hostility that the status quo has towards renewable stuff that makes the world a better place.
Wow. Um, so then to then wrap it up a little bit, what would you then have as a suggestion or tips, tricks for those who are not um, turned down by this pushback, who are willing to be courageous, who are willing to ride those very very bumpy ways, maybe ride into a hurricane, because they intrinsically see that their solution of their opportunity can be a game changer. What would you give them for advice, or what kind of, yeah, we almost say, what kind of hand would you give them um, to be and stay courageous and not be over how do you call that, um, outgunned.
Yeah, it is. Here, I think, Alexander, it becomes the passion and the energy and the authenticity come into play big time. Because if you, perseverance is a big word here. Don't stop when you believe in it. And that is, and if you would run a company as a hired gun, at a certain point in time, you can say, well, I give up because the pushback is too big. We will not succeed. And while I think that entrepreneurs who have a dream to use this to make the world a little bit better have just a little bit more energy and passion to go on a little bit longer. So
But
that
there's
is
also,
one.
yeah,
That is one thing. The other thing that I would say is find uh, find business partners. First of all, find uh, investors who share that passion. It's difficult, but don't step into the mistake of too easily accepting investors. I've made that mistake several times myself, accepting investors because I badly needed investors. And I said, well, if I now accept those investors, then I have money and then we can go on. And then I brought in the wrong investors who who didn't share in the end the longer terms that we needed to succeed. And that is so the wrong investors. So and then the of course, the business partners, maybe you find a way, if you're in the paper industry, you find a way to cooperate with an industry that is actually being destroyed by you by trying to explain how you can help them to survive on the longer term. So you need scale, and that is that brings me to another point, the final point, maybe that the B Corps used to be SME companies, small mid-sized companies, and then certainly at a certain point in time, the bigger companies like Danone were convinced that they should change. They were convinced by the small companies, by the real entrepreneurs. So they said, wow, this is something great. Let's do that. So they started to move into that direction as well, inspired by those small companies. And but many of those small sustainable companies were against the big ones because they said, oh, no, 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 they're greenwashing, they're not sustainable, blah, 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 blah. And now, for example, in the Netherlands, the biggest retail chain, Albert Heijn, became a B Corp. But they now are giving help because they're putting all the small B Corps on the shelf. So you what I mean to say here is that you need sometimes to accept suboptimal big parties to help you to push you into the market. And that is because if only very small little fractions
mm,
here and there start try to change the world, and there are so many small initiatives, there's tens of thousands of small initiatives, it's not big enough. It's not big enough. There are 340 million 340 million companies in the world, and that is so we need size to change, and that is, and most of them are small and mid-sized companies. Only 0.4%, 0.4%, 99.6% are small and mid-sized enterprise SMEs, and 0.4 are corporates, big ones. And that is so the change makers, 99.6%, that's the change makers that you were talking about in the beginning of this podcast, Alexander.
and the more changes we have, the harder it become for the big ones to ignore them.
Yeah, yeah, and that is, and eventually the smart big ones, you see it happening, and that and no matter what Trump is doing, actually it doesn't matter so much what he is doing, because he can say, well, there is no climate change. Well, it's good, okay, good for him that he believes that, but we'll figure it out. The farmers in the US will find that there is a climate change.
But
People
the
there.
the interesting thing, Lane, is that you bring it then back to locality, to regional resilience. That if we solve it as a region or whatever boundary that has, you turn your region, your social cohesion, your network, your companies, which if you turn as a region towards more healthier products which do not impact the environment, then other regions will look at you and they want to copy that, and suddenly you start to weaving a web of regions together who share the common vision. And then the multinationals may say, "Oh, we're losing our market. Maybe we should change something."
Yeah, and it will take time. And I think that whole process that you just described will take time. I personally think it will take more time than what we have.
Hmm.
And so we will see, as a result of that, that we take more time than what we actually have been given. We will see big disruptions, bigger than we have seen so far. And that is, uh, and that in itself will speed up the process. In the 1930s in the Netherlands, everybody knew that it could be a disaster with the sea and the dikes would break and we would have a flooding, big flooding. We knew it. We knew it, but we didn't see the urgency to invest money in it until 1953. There was this big flood and thousands of people were killed. And then all of a sudden the money was available and to build this whole new system to protect the country against the sea. I think it's more or less the same what we see now with sustainability, with everything that's going on in the world. That we see it. Uh, Sometimes we don't want to see it. A Harvard professor once told me, Lane, the biggest problem with humanity is denial. We see it, but we don't want to see it. We don't like it. We don't like what we see, and that is, but it will happen, and that is, and what you when you now put it into micro scales, into regions, into cities, into streets, there people step up and they do things. In the town where I live in, people wanted to have a green street. So they all came together in the street, and they didn't want to wait for the community or the city board to decide that they would have a budget for the street to green. No, no, they pulled out the stones from the street and they planted flowers and plants and trees, and now it's a green street, and everybody is happy with it, and they take care of it because they planted it themselves. It's also normal and logical and regional. So what if Trump says there is no climate change? Well, the farmers in those regions that they know. They'd only laugh. Yeah, they say, well, but because they feel it, they see it every day. So if somebody says there is no, if somebody tells you there is no rain, and you're standing in the full rain, you say, well, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm standing in the rain here. It rains on I feel it. So when you say there is no rain, or there is no sun, or rain, so people, it's the same with food. Healthy food, non-healthy food. Do we have houses for? Do we have a future for our children? People feel it, and that is well, and you cannot deny that. So the basic wishes for life are I've seen in all my business life all over the world more or less the same. More or less the same. People want to eat something that should be healthy, what they eat, preferably. They should have food for their children. Their children should go to school. They have a roof. So the basic, nobody wants a war. And nobody wants to a weapon. So if you say, well, let's stop the whole weapon industry, that again, Alexander, is an example of what I said earlier about the status quo. Well, the weapons industry needs wars. So there will always be wars because the weapon industry is bringing so much money to pension funds. So that if I say, okay, I'm your pension fund, Alexander, so I'm
Mm.
going to give you 10% less pension, but I'm not going to invest in the weapons industry. Are you happy with that? You would say, no, what do you say? 10% less pension? No, I'm not so happy with that. And that is, so I think the pushback from the system that we live in the world to change, the pushback is so big that it needs big disasters to
Mm.
change. And that is, unfortunately, and that is, it's human. And in the meantime, of course, entrepreneurs will already move in that direction because they will see it happen.
Yeah,
It will.
and one thing that comes to my mind, and then in order to conclude, open up the conversation, because if everybody feels it, then you have space for a conversation and dialogue. And once you can start a dialogue, you can address it, and you can agree to disagree, but at least you put the cards on the table. And that requires courageous people to move beyond their own feeling and their own denial and their own fear, because they feel something is happening, but they find it difficult to express.
Yeah, exactly. And that is, and being courageous is difficult, I think, because it brings risks, it brings less income, you might lose your job. There's all kinds of things that might happen if you are courageous and you say what you think. And that is, yeah.
But dare to do it.
Yeah, and that is to follow your basic instinct, and that is, yeah, it doesn't always make you a richer man money-wise, but it makes you, I think, a richer man morally wise. So you can be happy with yourself, and that is, but that is not so easy. And that is the discussion this morning with the legal people that I had a meeting with, and I said, well, how many of those business lawyers in your communities dare to say, this is not okay what's going on here? I do not agree. Well, they would just be fired and replaced by somebody else, they said. And that is, yeah, okay. So if you know that, and you have a mortgage on your home, do you continue working there, or will you say, well, I'm confident enough that I can find a job anywhere, somewhere else, and that is an good luck to you with your awful ideas. But it is not easy. It is it is it's not easy to be a courageous entrepreneur.
Wow, I'm pleased you took time to listen to the whole episode. Consider supporting the podcast financially by donating a small amount or rate my podcast in your podcast app. In any case, thank you again for listening, and hopefully you join me up next time.